I was reborn. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't the hospital's pale white ceiling I saw, but the expensive crystal chandelier in the bedroom Julian and I shared. The air held a faint scent of gardenias. It was my favorite smell. I shot upright, my heart pounding wildly. Hadn't I already died? On that cold, rainy day, struck by a sudden heart attack, I had died alone on the way to the hospital. Before I died, my heart was full of resentment and unwillingness toward Julian. We had been married 3 years, respectful as ice. He was a man of few words, like an iceberg that would never thaw. He never spoke much, never took initiative, and none of the usual intimacies of a married couple existed between us. I thought he didn't love me. Our marriage was nothing more than an exchange of interests between two families. But when my soul left my body and I watched him hold my cooling corpse, those eyes that had always been as calm as a deep well, for the first time, revealed a world-shattering despair. He cried. He cried like a child abandoned by the whole world. It turned out he loved me. In a way I had never understood before, clumsy and profound, he loved me. Click. The door opened. Julian was back. He wore a crisply tailored black suit, tall and lean, handsome, yet that face, as always, showed hardly any expression. He seemed momentarily surprised to see me awake. Then he walked over, set his briefcase on the bedside table, his movements, like him, meticulous. "Wife's awake." A strange voice suddenly sounded in my mind. I jumped, instinctively looking around. In the room, it was just the two of us. "That dress she's wearing today is really pretty." The voice spoke again. I snapped my head up and looked at Julian. He stood by the wardrobe, undoing his tie, the profile of his face hard and reserved, lips pressed tight. He hadn't said a word. But that voice was as clear as if it were speaking right in my ear. A ridiculous thought popped into my head. Could it be that I could hear his inner voice? "Today is our 3rd wedding anniversary." I tried speaking, my voice a little dry from nerves. He paused in the middle of loosening his tie. He turned to look at me. His face still wore that indifferent expression, and he merely murmured. "She remembers. She still has feelings for me." Wonderful. Should I tell her I booked a restaurant and even got a gift? No, would that seem too contrived? I looked at the man in front of me. On the surface, he was as calm as a robot. Inside his head, though, an entire inner drama had already played out. The huge contrast made me want to laugh. So this was his true face? An exterior of coldness, but with so much inner performance it could fill a book, a brooding flirt? "Aren't you going to say anything?" I looked at him and asked on purpose. His thin lips pressed tight as he silently stared at me. "Say what?" "Say I love you?" Too sudden, it would scare her. "Say happy anniversary?" Too ordinary, not sincere enough. What to do? I'm so nervous. I watched the cold sweat almost beating at his temples and finally couldn't hold it in. I let out a little snort of laughter. He froze, seemingly not understanding why I had suddenly laughed. What is she laughing at? Did I do something wrong? But she looks really beautiful when she laughs. My laugh seemed to flip some switch. The stream of thoughts in his head started refreshing like crazy. I tamped down my amusement and waved to him. "Come here." He hesitated for a moment, then strode over to the bedside. This was the first time I felt so confident in front of him. "Julian," I looked up at him and said, "for our wedding anniversary, isn't there supposed to be some kind of gesture?" He froze. "Expressing? Do you mean a kiss? Can I? Will she push me away?" I watched a flicker of longing, then a flash of timidity cross his deep eyes. My heart inexplicably softened. What a fool. In my last life, how much did I miss his careful, tentative love for me? I took a deep breath and leaned in, deliberately brushing his cool, thin lips with mine. Like a dragonfly skimming water, a brief touch and then release. The whole world fell silent. Julian was completely petrified. And in my head, only one thunderous thought remained. Oh my God, my wife kissed me. Julian had frozen. He stood there rigid, his eyes wide like a wooden puppet struck by an acupressure point. If I couldn't still hear the voice in his head, I'd have thought his soul had left his body. It's soft. Fragrant. Sweet. My wife's lips are sweet. I want to kiss her again. I looked at his solemn face and listened to the rubbish in his head, my cheeks involuntarily flushing. What on earth is this guy even thinking about? Ahem. I cleared my throat, trying to break the strange silence. I'm hungry. Let's go downstairs and eat. After saying that, I threw back the covers and bolted into the bathroom like I was fleeing. Behind me, Julian still stood there like a pillar. She's shy. She looks so cute when she's shy. I'm hungry too. Want to eat. I didn't hear the rest of his thoughts because I had already closed the bathroom door. I leaned against the door, my heart still pounding. In the mirror, my face was as red as a ripe apple. Reborn into another life, and with the extra golden ability to hear his thoughts, this feeling was really something else. Dinner had been prepared by the housekeeper. It was plentiful. Julian sat opposite me, eating with elegant, refined movements, not making a single sound. If the young women in our company who worship him like a god could see him like this, they'd probably scream. But to my ears, the voice in his head was far more interesting than the way he ate. This sweet and sour fish is what my wife likes. The housekeeper did well today. I'll serve my wife a piece. His hand picked up the communal chopsticks and reached toward the dish of fish. The chopsticks froze in midair. No, she seems to dislike others serving her. If she doesn't eat, I'll be very hurt. His hand silently withdrew again. Watching his inner struggle, I felt both annoyed and amused. How could this man be so awkward about something like this? So I simply served myself a large piece of fish and put it into my bowl, deliberately saying, "Housekeeper, the fish you made today is truly delicious." Julian's eyes lit up in an instant. She likes it. I knew she'd like it. Tell the housekeeper to make it again tomorrow. No, make it every day. Wait, eating it every day would get boring. I quietly ate the fish, listening to the inner drama he could spin into a whole novel over a single fish, and felt like I had eaten an extra bowl of rice. You should eat too. I looked at his barely touched bowl and utensils and reminded him. My wife cares about me. She finally cares about me. I'm so happy. He gave a small and then quietly picked up a forkful of greens into his bowl. These greens are so bitter. For my wife, I endure them. Me. I only just remembered, Julian is picky, the thing he hates most is vegetables. In my last life, I never knew. Because every time, with a blank expression, he would finish all the vegetables I picked for him. It turned out he didn't like them, he was just enduring them. My heart felt lightly stung by something. A little sour, a little aching. I put down my chopsticks and looked at him. Let's go on a date tomorrow. Julian's chopsticks clattered onto the table. He jerked his head up and stared at me, those deep eyes full of disbelief. A date? Did I hear that right? My wife wants to go on a date with me? What marvelous news. What should I wear? How about that new French restaurant in the west of the city? Will she like the necklace I got her? Watching the inner world inside him erupt in an instant, the curve of my mouth rose higher and higher. It's settled then. 10 tomorrow morning, wait for me at the door. With that, I stood up and returned to my room in a cheerful mood. Leaving Julian alone at the dining table, dumbfounded, still digesting this enormous surprise that fell from the sky. Reborn, I refuse to repeat the past. Julian, since you don't know how to love me, this time I'll take the lead and come to you. The next morning I deliberately got up early. Opening the wardrobe, I found myself at a loss. In my previous life my dressing style leaned toward mature and steady, the colors were mostly black, white, and gray. I thought a man like Julian would prefer a wife who was dignified and proper. Now that I think about it, I was completely wrong. As I rifled through my clothes, I pricked up my ears, listening to the sounds downstairs. Julian was up even earlier than I was. I heard him pacing back and forth in the living room below. It's 9 o'clock, why hasn't she come down yet? Did I say something wrong last night and she doesn't want to go out with me? Maybe this outfit, this one makes her look younger. No, this is too casual. Will she think I don't take her seriously? I listened as he agonized over what to wear, nearly driving himself crazy, and couldn't help laughing. In the end, I chose a white dress. The cut was simple, but it brought out my complexion. I put on light makeup, loosely pinned up my long hair, leaving a few wisps free to look playful and gentle. When I came downstairs, Julian was standing at the door like a statue waiting for his wife. He wore a well-tailored casual suit and his hair was carefully styled. He looked a few degrees fresher and handsomer than he usually did at the office. When he saw me, his eyes went straight to me in an instant. Beautiful. My wife looks so beautiful today. Like a fairy. I want to kiss her. But I don't dare, I'm afraid she'll think I'm being frivolous. On the surface he still wore that stern, upright look, but the roots of his ears had quietly reddened. I watched his innocent expression and felt elated. I walked in front of him and deliberately turned around once. How is it? His Adam's apple bobbed up and down, his gaze flickered and he couldn't bring himself to look me in the eye. But he only managed to say 2 words, not bad. Not just not bad. It's so beautiful it's killing me. Oh my God, did she just smile at me? My heart is racing. I suppressed a laugh, stepped closer, and deliberately looped my arm through his. His body went rigid in an instant, like a stone. She linked arms with me. What should I do? Should I link arms with her too? No, that would be far too unladylike. I felt as if what I was holding onto wasn't someone's arm but a red-hot iron bar. Let's go, Mr. Julian. I pulled him toward the exit. If we don't leave now, we'll miss the movie. All the way, Julian kept the same matching arm, matching leg pose, rigidly being dragged along by me. The stream of commentary in his head didn't stop from beginning to end. We went to see a romance film. The cinema was very dim. Around us were couples whispering and cozying up to each other. Julian sat beside me, his back perfectly straight, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the big screen. The couple in front have been making out forever. Shameless. But I'm a little jealous. I want to hold my wife's hand too. Her hand is just sitting there, I just have to reach out. No, what if she pulls away? I'm so conflicted. Listening to his thoughts, I felt like I was about to die of anxiety for him. How could this man be so cowardly? I squared my shoulders, reached out proactively, and took the large hand resting on his knee. His hand was hot, the palm sweaty. The moment I grasped it, he jolted as if electrocuted. He probably didn't know what part of the movie they were at. Because his mind held only one sentence, looping like crazy. She held my hand, she held my hand, she held my hand, she held my hand, she held my hand. I listened and felt like I was hearing a tape recorder on repeat. By the time the movie ended I couldn't remember any of the plot. I was too busy listening to him mutter. After the movie, we went to eat. It was the French restaurant that belonged to his beloved Nora. The atmosphere was wonderful, and it was expensive. During the meal, he finally returned to something like normal. Where should we go this afternoon? He asked, his voice as calm as ever. Take her shopping this afternoon. Women all like shopping. Buy that mall and give it to her? No, that'd be tacky. Me, the mindset of the rich is just so plain and unadorned. This afternoon, I want to go somewhere, I said. Where? Our university. Julian froze. We were university alumni, this was something I only learned after we married. In my previous life, we had never returned to our alma mater together. He looked at me, his expression a little complicated. She wants to return to her alma mater? Has she remembered that person? That person? My heart skipped a beat. Who? That person Julian mentioned was my senior, the one I had once openly pursued, Lucas. It was a chapter of my past that now, when I think of it, fills me with a certain shame. Lucas was a campus legend, student council president, handsome and suave. As for his courting of me, a young underclassman, he neither refused nor accepted. He just kept me dangling. In my previous life, after Julian and I married, Lucas still sought me out. He said he had always had feelings for me, he was just young and reckless back then. I believed him. I even had a huge fight with Julian over it and even brought up divorce. Thinking back now, I was hopelessly foolish. The thing Lucas loved was never me, but the title of Mrs. Fu and the benefits it could bring him. And Julian. I looked across at the man who had grown quiet because of my suggestion. She really still can't forget him. Well, that man is better than me, smarter, more charming to girls. What am I? Nothing more than a substitute she got through an arranged family match. The voice in his head was full of self-mockery and bitterness, like an upset jar of vinegar overturned. My heart felt pricked by a needle. So he had always known about Lucas's presence. So in his mind, he really saw himself that way. Julian. I looked at him, speaking earnestly. I want to go back to our alma mater, not because of anyone. Simply because it's the place we both spent 4 years. I want to walk the paths where we may have brushed past each other countless times. He lifted his head, and the gloom in his eyes seemed to lift a little. Really? It's not because of that man? She wants to walk the paths we both walked? What kind of divine confession is this? The mood inside his head shifted faster than flipping a page. One moment it was a torrential downpour of sourness. The next it was clear skies for miles. I watched him like that, feeling both pained and amused. Let's go. I stood up. If we don't go soon, the school will be closed. We really went back to our alma mater. It was a weekend, and the campus was very quiet. We walked along the tree-lined path, sunlight filtering through the leaves and scattering dappled patterns on the ground. I used to love coming here to read, I said, pointing to a nearby bench. I knew you always sat in that spot, you could sit there an entire afternoon. I would sit under the tree behind you and watch you. I was stunned. I turned to look at him. His gaze flickered, pretending to study the scenery. So, in the past I didn't know about, he had been that close to me. My heart felt as if it were being slowly soaked in warm water, warm and soft. We kept walking and reached the library. During my 4 years at university, I spent half of my time here, I said. Me too. You were always in that window seat on the 3rd floor. To be closer to you, I would every day try to grab the seat next to you. Unfortunately, I never succeeded even once. The librarian even warned me several times, saying I was reserving a seat but not sitting in it. I listened, my nose growing a little sour. That fool. How many foolish things has he done for me that I didn't know about? We wandered for a long time, almost covering the entire campus. The setting sun bathed the whole campus in a tender golden hue. We walked to the edge of the sports field. On the stands, a few students sat here and there. Julian, I stopped and turned to look at him. Did you ever date in college? No. I was too busy looking at you to have time for that. That answer was exactly what I expected. I didn't either, I said. He looked at me, seeming a little surprised. That Lucas. He couldn't help it, he mentioned the name. I did chase him, it's true. I looked at him and said calmly, but we never were together. And besides, I don't feel anything for him anymore. Really? Really? She really doesn't like that man anymore? Then, do I have a chance? Really? I looked into his eyes and said with absolute clarity, Julian, right now, I only want to settle down and live a good life with the silly, awkward man by my side. His pupils contracted sharply. He seemed frozen in place. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled over his handsome face, casting a soft light across it. I saw starlight in the depths of his eyes, little by little brightening. It was as if the entire Milky Way had fallen into them. Is she confessing to me? She must be confessing to me. She said I'm a stupid, dull man. But she wants to spend her life with me. I'm going crazy. Right now I want to pick her up and spin her around right here. I watched him, on the verge of exploding with excitement, unable to keep the smile at the corner of his mouth down. So, I said, reaching out my hand to him, Mr. Julian, to the future, please take care of me. He looked at my outstretched hand, and after a long time, slowly took it. His hand trembled slightly. He didn't speak. But I heard him, in his heart, using all his strength to answer me. All right. For a lifetime, please take care of me. Since that day at our alma mater, after we talked things through, Julian's attitude toward me changed subtly. He was still as taciturn as before. But at home, he began awkwardly learning how to be kind to me. For example, he would get up early to warm milk for me himself. Not too hot, my wife will find it hard to take. Not too cold either, it's bad for the stomach. This temperature should be just right. Then he would watch me nervously finish the milk like a schoolboy waiting for his teacher to check his homework. The moment I praised it, delicious, he could set off fireworks in his heart for the whole day. For example, he began to remember my preferences. I casually mentioned wanting the osmanthus cakes from that old shop in the south of the city. The next day, those osmanthus cakes appeared on our dining table. I knew the south side was a 2-hour drive round trip from our home. And he, to buy me a pastry, had gotten up at 5 a.m. As long as my wife likes it, no run is too far. The way she eats is so cute, like a little hamster. I want to pinch her cheeks. I felt all of this from him, meticulous, clumsy affection, and my heart seemed to be filled with honey. To live again and be loved by him like this is truly wonderful. But calm days are always short-lived. One day, Julian's business partner returned from abroad and specially held a banquet to welcome him back. He asked me to accompany him. At the banquet, I saw an unexpected person. Vivian. A woman who, in my previous life, caused me enormous trouble. She was the daughter of Julian's business partner, with an innocent face and gentle demeanor, the typical goddess in a man's heart. In my past life, I spent my days trailing behind Julian under the guise of being his sister. To outsiders, they were a picture-perfect match, a couple made for each other. I, his lawful wife, seemed like an unnecessary third wheel. Because of that, I often got angry with Julian. And he never explained. Looking back now, with his kind of logic, even if I explained, you wouldn't believe me, so why bother? It's no wonder I misunderstood him. When Vivian saw me linking arms with Julian, a barely perceptible flash of jealousy crossed her eyes. But she quickly masked it. She carried her wineglass and glided over with graceful poise, a polite smile on her face. Julian, long time no see. Her voice was honeyed and soft. Julian only gave a faint nod. She came too? Annoying. Hearing the unabashed disdain in his words, I almost laughed out loud. Is this, the sister-in-law? Vivian's gaze landed on me, carrying a hint of appraisal. She's really beautiful. Miss Vivian flatters me, I replied with a smile. Julian, Dad has been looking for you. Vivian's body, as if unintentionally, edged closer to Julian. Julian, instinctively, shifted a step toward me. The movement was exceedingly slight. Stay away from me. Your perfume is too strong, it's suffocating. My wife's scent is nicer, subtle, sweet. Vivian seemed unaware of his distance and continued warmly, I just came back from France and brought you a gift, those cufflinks from your favorite brand. Julian frowned. When did I ever like that brand? I don't wear cufflinks at all. This woman has it wrong. I watched Vivian, already privately lighting a candle for her. Girl, you didn't do your homework. Julian simply doesn't wear cufflinks because he thinks they're too much trouble. He only wears the simplest white shirts. That was something I discovered by accident in my past life. Is that so? I said to Vivian, deliberately adopting a surprised look, but Julian never wears cufflinks, you know. Vivian's face froze instantly. Her complexion went from pale to ashen and back again, quite a spectacle. She probably hadn't expected me to publicly expose her like that in front of so many people. How could that be? She forced a smile. Maybe I remembered wrong. Julian used to really like collecting these. Julian didn't even bother to give her a glance. He just looked down at me. My wife is amazing. With one sentence she completely shut that woman up. Just as expected of my wife. I love it so much. Listening to the fangirl-like remarks in his head, I felt my smile about to slip. This guy really is my #1 fan. Miss Vivian, I said to Vivian, still smiling. Julian is someone whose tastes change quickly. In the future, you might as well not bother. After all, only I, as his wife, truly know what he likes and dislikes now. My words were not harsh. But each one landed like a needle in Vivian's heart. They both asserted my claim and subtly mocked her misplaced affection. Vivian's composure completely fell apart. She looked to Julian pleadingly, hoping he'd at least speak up for her like he used to. Unfortunately, she was disappointed. Julian simply said to her, coolly, my wife is right. Then he looked at me, and in those eyes that were usually indifferent there flickered a tenderness I had never seen before. Though that smile vanished in an instant. Vivian was utterly defeated. She found an excuse and slunk away. In a war without gunpowder, I had won completely. After the banquet, on the way home, Julian was very quiet. But the voice in his head was as lively as a concert. Wife was so handsome today. With just a few words she sent that white lotus packing. She's literally my goddess. I really want to pin her against the car door and kiss her. No, the driver is still here. I sat beside him, listening to his predatory thoughts, my cheeks burning. I could only turn my head and pretend to look at the scenery outside the window. We got home. No sooner had I closed the door than Julian pinned me against it. He said nothing, he just bowed his head and kissed me. That kiss was unlike any before. It was no longer a cautious probing but carried an almost frantic possessiveness and a sense of conquest. He kissed me until I could hardly breathe. You are mine. Only mine. No one is to take you from me. His thoughts were domineering and obsessive. I could feel that Vivian's appearance had set him off. He was afraid. Afraid I might leave him for someone else. I reached up, wrapped my arms around his neck, and clumsily returned his kiss. I wanted to tell him with my actions that I wouldn't go. In this life I would go nowhere. I would stay right here, by your side. Although I won Vivian's war, the matter still left a small after-effect in our life. Julian was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of crisis. He became clingier than before. Although outwardly he still wore that cold, aloof expression, as long as I was at home, his gaze hardly ever left me. I watched TV, and he sat beside me pretending to look over some documents. This show isn't good. My wife's profile is far more beautiful than anything on TV. I put on a face mask, and he brought me tea and water. What scent is this mask? It smells like something delicious. I wonder if kissing it would be poisonous. I even go to the bathroom and he stands at the door. He grandly calls it, afraid you'll slip. In reality, what he's thinking is, why isn't my wife coming out yet? What if she fell in? Should I go in and check? No, she'll call me a pervert. His all-around, no blind spot surveillance leaves me both exasperated and amused. That day I was reading in the study when my phone rang. It was Lucas. Seeing that name, I frowned instinctively. After I was reborn, I deliberately cut off all contact with him. I didn't expect him to come looking for me anyway. I walked out to the balcony and answered the phone. Amelia. On the other end, Lucas's gentle, refined voice came through. Is something wrong? My tone was very cold. Nothing much, it's just. I heard you haven't been doing very well lately. He said, "Has Julian been bullying you?" I was momentarily stunned. "What do you mean?" "I heard that at the banquet the other day Vivian embarrassed you." Lucas sighed, his tone full of pity. "Amelia, you should never have married him. A man like him could never know how to cherish you." I listened, feeling nothing but irony. In my last life, he used that same tender face to make me spin in circles. "Lucas," I cut him off, "whether I'm doing well or not is none of your business. Julian is my husband, and I know exactly how he treats me. Don't call me again." I hung up as soon as I finished speaking. Then I blocked and deleted him in one smooth motion. I had just turned around after doing all that and saw Julian standing right behind me. He didn't know when he had come. He was just standing there so quietly. His face showed little expression. But his inner thoughts betrayed him. Lucas. He still went to see her after all. She answered, and she talked to him for so long. Could it be that she can't let go of her past feelings for him? My heart hurt so much. I looked at him, feeling like acid rain was about to start pouring down on his head. "You heard all that?" I asked. He didn't speak, just nodded. The light in his eyes dimmed as if covered with a layer of dust. I sighed. Standing on tiptoe, I kissed his lips first. I blocked and deleted her. "What are you still being jealous about?" He froze. She blocked and deleted her? For me? She even kissed me? Was she trying to comfort me? "Julian," I said, looking at him seriously, "I'll say it one last time. Amelia, in this life, the next life, and the life after that, will only ever love you. Before, I was foolish, my eyes were blind. From now on, they won't be." My words were like a beam of light that instantly illuminated his entire bleak world. The dimness in his eyes was chased away little by little. In its place surged an overwhelming joy. He suddenly swept me up and held me horizontally in his arms. "What are you doing?" I was startled. "Back to the room." He was concise. His voice, however, betrayed a faint, barely noticeable tremor from excitement. "My wife confessed to me. She only likes me. I must immediately have her bear my exclusive seal. From the inside out, she must become mine." Listening to his domineering CEO-style inner monologue, my cheeks flushed so red I could have bled. This man, really, hopeless. To completely dispel Julian's insecurities, I decided to take him back to my parents' house. My parents had never really liked Julian. They thought he was too cold and too reserved, afraid that if I married him I would be wronged. In my previous life, every time I went home I would complain to them about Julian's faults. Over time, their impression of him grew worse. This time, I had to reverse that situation. On the weekend I called my mother in advance. When she heard I was bringing Julian, she was quiet on the other end of the line for a long time. In the end she only said, "If you're coming back, then come back." I knew they still had reservations in their hearts. On the way to my parents' house, Julian seemed even more nervous than I was. He changed outfits 3 times before finally deciding. He was carrying several large and small gift bags. "My father-in-law likes drinking tea, this tea set should be all right, right? My mother-in-law seems to like silk scarves, will she like this one? Might they still not like me? What if they want my wife to divorce me? No way, I would never divorce her, even if it kills me." Listening to his inner monologue, as tense as a wartime mobilization, I couldn't help but take his icy hand. "Don't be nervous, I'm here." He glanced at me, nodded, but his whole body remained tightly wound. At my parents' house, they really didn't give Julian a warm reception. My father sat on the sofa, staring at the newspaper without lifting an eyelid. My mother had taken the gift, but her face showed no smile. "Have a seat," my mother said lightly. The atmosphere turned awkward. Julian, like a schoolboy caught misbehaving, sat up straight on the couch and didn't dare move. What should I do? My future in-laws really seemed to dislike me. Should I say something? What should I say? Wish them good health? That's too cliché. Compliment their tasteful decor? Too fake. I watched him nearly sweating from nerves and decided to take the initiative. Dad, Mom, I sat down beside them and looped my arm through my mother's. Don't be so serious, you're scaring Julian. A grown man scared, my father snorted from behind his newspaper. Of course he is, I said with righteous confidence. He may look cold, but he's actually a big coward. Julian. Wife, are you trying to make me look bad? I ignored the protests in his head and continued, besides, he's truly good to me. He knows I like osmanthus cake, so he'll drive to the south of the city early in the morning to buy it for me. He knows my stomach is sensitive, so he warms milk for me every morning. The last time Vivian bullied me, he was the first to stand up for me. I embellished every kindness Julian had shown me that I could think of. My parents' expressions gradually softened as they listened. My dad put down his newspaper. My mom began to look Julian over with a new focus. Really? She looked at me skeptically. Of course it's true. I pounded my chest in assurance. If you don't believe me, go ask him. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward Julian in unison. Julian was nearly frozen into a statue. Just nod. Your wife has already paved the way this far. Say yes. He was frantic inside but couldn't manage a word. Finally, encouraged by my look, he gave a heavy nod at last. He looked as foolish as could be. My father looked at him and suddenly smiled. All right, seeing you like this, you don't seem like the sort to mistreat my daughter. My mother exhaled and added, as long as he treats you well, that's enough. And just like that, I had diffused a family crisis. At noon, my mother prepared a large spread of dishes. The atmosphere at the table was noticeably much better than before. My mother even picked up a piece of food with her chopsticks for Julian. Julian, flattered and almost about to drop his bowl. My mother-in-law just served me. Does this mean she's accepted me? I'm so moved. Even if this dish is poisoned, I'll still eat it. I watched his pathetic expression and quietly kicked him under the table. Since we returned from my parents' house, Julian has been in a great mood. He was visibly much more relaxed than before. Our relationship also entered an unprecedentedly sweet phase. He would start sneaking a kiss from me before leaving for work. He would tuck a blanket over me when I napped. He would remember all my little likes and quirky habits. Still, he wasn't much for saying sweet things. But all his love was hidden in those silent actions and in the ceaseless inner commentary that played in his head. I thought we would stay like that, happy forever. Until Damien appeared. Damien was Julian's half-brother. A bastard who had lived his whole life in Julian's shadow. He had always regarded Julian as a thorn in his side. In my previous life, he colluded with outsiders and looted the Fu family's company, ultimately leaving Julian utterly ruined. And it was during that period that my own heart attack was triggered by excessive worry. You could say Damien was the instigator of the tragedy in our past life. Reborn, I would never allow history to repeat itself. Damien's arrival was sudden. It happened at a Fu family banquet. He was personally escorted in by Patriarch Edward, the elder Mr. Fu, Julian's father. From today on, Damien will be the second young master of the Fu family, Edward announced in front of everyone. A single stone stirred 1,000 waves. All eyes fell on Julian. I could feel the man beside me grow cold in an instant. He still came. This family could never truly accept my mother. I took his hand at my side, already clenched into a fist. He turned to look at me, his gaze full of suppressed pain. Damien resembled Julian in some ways. But his demeanor was more effeminate and ruthless. He came up to us, a fake smile on his face. Big brother, big sister-in-law. He spoke as if they were intimate. I felt a wave of nausea looking at him. This was the man who in my previous life had ruined my family. Hello. Julian's voice was cold as ice. Big brother still doesn't like me, Damien sighed dramatically, pretending to be aggrieved. But it's fine, we'll have plenty of time to get along from now on. His words carried meaning. I could hear the threat and the provocation in them. I knew war was about to begin. This time I would not be the fool who knew nothing like I had been in my last life. Julian, your enemy is my enemy too. On your battlefield, I'll go with you. When Damien joined the Fu group, it was like a pebble thrown into a calm lake. He was placed in the marketing department as a deputy director. On the surface, he behaved obediently, humble and polite. Behind the scenes, however, he began steadily to win people over and cultivate his own power base. Julian naturally noticed. He started to become busier than before. He worked late every day. When he came home, there was always a trace of stubborn exhaustion on his face. But he never mentioned work in front of me. He was simply more silent than before. Yet I could hear all the anxieties and pressures in his mind. Damien moved faster than I had imagined. He had teamed up with the developer for that plot in the east of the city. That land was crucial to the company's strategy for the second half of the year. It absolutely could not fall into his hands. That plot in the east? A thought stirred within me. I remembered that in my previous life it was precisely because of that land that Julian's company began to run into trouble. Damien and that developer had set a trap. They made Julian buy that land at an inflated price at auction. In the end, the plot was impossible to develop. The company lost a huge sum of money because of it. No. I couldn't sit back and do nothing. That day, using the excuse of wanting to go shopping, I had the driver take me out to the east side of the city. I remembered the developer's name was Victor, a man notorious for being a lecher. I changed into the plainest clothes I had, put on a mask and a hat, and went into the upscale club Victor frequented. I waited in the club's lobby for a long time. Finally I saw that familiar figure. Victor's belly was big and his face slick with oil. He had a young girl in his arms and was about to go upstairs. I drew a deep breath and walked over. "Victor," I called after him. He turned and froze for a moment when he saw me. Then a flash of astonishment crossed his eyes. Although I was dressed simply, my looks and bearing could not be hidden. "Miss, you. I have something to discuss with you, alone." Victor leered me up and down. "Sure." He pushed the girl beside him aside and gave me a greasy smile. I followed him into a private room. No sooner had the door closed than his hands started wandering toward me. I stepped back to avoid him. "Victor," I said, pulling a sheaf of photographs from my bag and tossing them onto the table, "before we talk business, take a look at this." In the photo were intimate pictures of Victor with the various lovers he kept. There were even some that were too shameful to look at. Victor's face changed in an instant. "You, who are you, really?" "Who I am doesn't matter," I said, looking at him coldly. "What matters is, what would happen if these photos ended up on your wife's and business partner's desks tomorrow?" "You wouldn't dare." "See if I dare." I met his fierce gaze without the slightest flinch. "That plot in the east of the city," I said, word by word, "Fu Corporation is buying it. And at the lowest price on the market." You're dreaming." "Is that so? Then we'll just wait and see." I finished and turned to leave. "Wait," he called after me from behind. I looked back. His face had already turned the color of pig's liver. He glared at me, grinding out the words between his teeth. "You really are ruthless." I came home holding the letter of intent I had signed with Victor. Julian hadn't returned yet. I sent him a text saying I wasn't feeling well and asking him to come home early. In less than half an hour I heard the door open. He was back. His steps were hurried. "What's wrong? Where do you feel bad?" He walked up to me anxiously, reaching out to check my forehead. I took his hand and shook my head. "I'm fine." I handed the contract to him. "Look at this." He took the contract, and when he saw the contents and the signature at the end his pupils suddenly contracted. He looked up at me, his eyes full of shock and disbelief. This is..." "I went to see Victor today," I said lightly. Had a chat about life, talked about ideals. Then he happily signed this contract. Julian was no fool. He knew things could never be as simple as I made them sound. She went to see Victor? That old lecher, did he do anything to her? Was she wronged? Damn it. He clenched his fist violently, a streak of bloodthirsty ferocity flashing in his eyes. It was the first time I'd seen such a terrifying emotion in him. He didn't do anything to me. Don't worry, I'm unharmed. He looked me over, examining me carefully. Only after confirming I was truly fine did some of the harshness within him slowly dissipate. He held me tightly in his arms. Very tightly. As if he wanted to press me into his very bones and blood. Don't ever do something so dangerous again. His voice was harshly hoarse. Do you hear me? I buried my face in his chest and mutely replied. Although he was scolding me, my heart felt sweet. Julian, I lifted my head to look at him. I don't want to see you like that again, the way you were in my last life. His body stiffened. What? Nothing. I shook my head, not wanting to bring up those unhappy things again. I just want to tell you that no matter what happens, I'll be by your side. We're husband and wife. Your honor is my honor. He looked at my eyes, and they reddened little by little. This man who was always unbreakable in front of others. In front of me, he was fragile like a child. Is my wife a goddess? How can she be so good? In my past life I must have saved the galaxy to be able to marry her. He lowered his head and kissed my forehead. Okay. Us, together. Having secured the plot in the east of the city, Julian's position at the company improved a lot. Edward even publicly praised him at the board meeting because of it. Damien's first move ended in failure. He stayed quiet for a while. But it was only the calm before the storm. I knew he would never give up that easily. Sure enough, before long the company's cash flow ran into trouble. A huge overseas loan was maliciously frozen by the bank. The company's normal operations were severely affected. Julian began to rush about like a man with no feet on the ground. I watched his face grow thinner day by day, the bluish circles under his eyes deepen, and my heart ached. I knew Damien must be behind this again. In the previous life, it was this very loan that became the last straw that broke the Fu Corporation. At that time, Julian begged everyone for help and suffered scorn. In the end he even had to turn to Vivian's father. The price was a commercial marriage with the Bai family. That meant divorcing me. He refused. Then the company went bankrupt. This time, I absolutely cannot let him go that far again. I began secretly studying the company's financial statements. Relying on some hazy memories from my previous life and my current understanding of Julian's inner voice, I discovered a loophole that had been overlooked by everyone. A flaw big enough to be fatal. I immediately told Julian what I had found. After listening, he looked at me and stayed silent for a long time. His expression was very complicated. How does she know this? These are the company's core secrets. What else has she been hiding from me? My heart tightened. I knew I had gone too far. I had already aroused his suspicion. I racked my brains for a plausible explanation. I was just looking around and guessing randomly. Even I found that excuse utterly weak. Julian watched me in silence for a long time. Just when I thought he was going to press further, he only sighed. He reached out and ruffled my hair. All right, I get it. No matter who she is. No matter what secrets she has. She's my wife. That's enough. I listened to his thoughts, and tears nearly fell. This fool, he actually chose to believe me so easily. No questions about reasons, no questions about the past. Simply because I am his wife. I threw myself into his arms and held him tightly. Julian, my voice trembling with sobs, you are so good. He patted my back and soothed me softly. Don't be afraid, I'm here. With the clues I provided, Julian quickly found evidence of Damien colluding maliciously with the bank. He took the evidence straight to the regulatory authorities. The bank immediately caved. Not only did they unfreeze the loan, they even sent a senior executive in person to apologize. The company's cash crisis was resolved. Damien this time tried to steal a march and ended up worse off. His reputation in the company plummeted. Edward was utterly disappointed in him. A crisis that could have toppled the entire Fu family was defused by our joint efforts. The company was back on track. Julian could finally breathe again. To celebrate, he chartered a yacht, saying he wanted to take me out to sea. Sea breeze, sunshine, sandy beach. Everything was as beautiful as a dream. At night, the yacht drifted on the calm sea. We nestled on the deck watching the stars. The stars above were bright and dense, scattered across the night sky like diamonds. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely, in awe. Julian responded. "Not as beautiful as you." I couldn't help laughing as I listened. This man was constantly sweet-talking, though all of it was in his head. "Julian," I turned to him, looking at him, don't you have anything you want to ask me?" I knew he still had doubts about me in his heart. He looked at me and shook his head. "I used to. Now, I don't." "Why?" "Because it's not important." He looked me straight in the eyes and said earnestly, "All I need to know is that you're my wife, that you love me, that's enough." His words warmed me through. But I knew some things still needed to be clarified. "What if," I looked at him and mustered my courage to speak, "I told you I'm not the same Amelia as before?" He paused for a moment. He seemed not to understand my meaning. I took a deep breath and decided to be frank. "I died once. Then I came back to life." When I finished, I nervously watched him, waiting for his reaction. Would he believe me? Would he think I was crazy? He looked at me in silence for a very long time. So long that I thought he was about to say something that would hurt me. Instead, he simply reached out and pulled me closer. "I know." I was completely stunned. You knew?" "From the first time you kissed me on your own, I knew. The old you wouldn't have done that." And, he paused, looking at me with eyes full of pity and lingering fear, "Someone as timid about pain as you could never have had a heart attack." Tears instantly welled up and poured out of me. So he knew everything. He hadn't been without suspicion. He simply chose not to ask, not to dwell on it. He quietly guarded me, this mysterious wife who had appeared from nowhere. "I'm sorry." I clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, last life, it's all my fault. I misunderstood you and hurt you." "No," he whispered as he wiped away my tears with a kiss, "it's my fault. I'm the one at fault. I'm too clumsy, I didn't know how to love you." "It's okay," he said, smiling at me, "God has given me another chance. This time I won't let you go." After I confessed the secret of my rebirth, the last trace of distance between Julian and me vanished. We became true soulmates in every sense. Damien completely lost his footing at the company. In the end, Edward drove him out of the Fu family and sent him abroad, forbidding him ever to return. Vivian was also affected because her father's company had its cooperation with the Fu family broken off. I heard she was being pushed into an arranged marriage, to an older man she didn't like. Everyone who'd ever hurt us got their comeuppance. And at last we welcomed the quiet life that belonged to us. Julian still wasn't one for many words. But he showed all his love through actions. He'd make me brown sugar water when I had my period. He'd refuse to leave my side when I was sick. He'd clumsily soothe me when I lost my temper. Of course, his specialty was silently firing off comments in his head. "Wife's angry again today. What do I do? Did I say the wrong thing again? Will buying a bag make her feel better? No, that's too tacky. Better buy an island." Every time I listened to those absurdly extravagant inner monologues of his, I felt equal parts annoyed and amused. But I was also very happy. Because I knew no one in this world would ever love me more than he did. A year later I became pregnant. When I showed him the pregnancy test with the 2 lines, this man who usually remained unflappable even in the face of disaster finally wore a stunned, goofy expression for the first time. He just stared at the test, motionless, for a full 5 minutes. Then his mind belatedly erupted into fireworks. I'm going to be a father. This can't be happening, am I dreaming? I have a baby as cute as my wife. Is it a boy or a girl? A girl would be like a little padded jacket keeping my wife close. A boy would be like I could protect my wife and our daughter. Aw, I'm so happy. He was so excited he spun around on the spot several times. Then he came over cautiously, crouched down, and pressed his ear to my still flat belly. Baby, I'm your dad. It was the first time he'd taken the initiative to say so much. Though not to me. Still, watching him with that gentle, expectant, silly dad look, I felt like the happiest woman in the world. After 10 months I gave birth to an adorable daughter. Named Nora. Nora's arrival made our home more complete and lively. Julian had completely transformed from an icy-faced CEO into a devoted daddy. The first thing he did every day when he came home from work was pick up our daughter. He changed diapers, fed her, and soothed her to sleep with his own hands, taking genuine delight in it. He was even more practiced at it than I was as her mother. Nora was clingy to him too. The moment he held her she would stop crying. Watching the warm little moments between father and daughter, I couldn't help but smile. My mind-reading ability was still with me. It was like a sweet background soundtrack to our life, letting me feel Julian's overflowing love for me at every moment. That day was our 5th wedding anniversary. After putting Nora to sleep in the evening, Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind. Wife. I love you. He finally spoke those words out loud. Though his voice still sounded a bit awkward. But I knew how much courage it had taken him. I said it. I finally said it. Will she be moved? Will she think I'm being too cheesy? I turned and looked at him, smiling. Julian, I stood on tiptoe and kissed his lips. I love you too. Outside, the moonlight was gentle. Inside, love clung between us. Reborn into this life and given such a man, nothing more was needed.